Check out carmarshal.com. The link is in the description. They help support us.
Project Veritas, very hit or miss. I would call this one a hit.
Okay.
They did an undercover investigation of Twitter. They talked to 8 former and current employees. And the former employees confirmed, which I think a lot of our viewers will know, is that they've been censoring and banning conservative and Trump-leaning content. Well, it turns out that current employees say that Twitter is also working on engineering new tools to have even more power over what they're banning. So they're planning all kinds of shadow bans and algorithms that'll specifically search for conservative content so that the review agents can censor that kind of content on the platform.
So these guys got undercover footage of Twitter employees and former Twitter employees talking about the fact that they arbitrarily ban people just at will, and that includes Trump supporters?
Use their own discretion and their own viewpoints to decide what kind of content is going to be banned. Yeah, so they said there's a sort of unwritten rule coming from the executives at Twitter that they're allowed to ban content for whatever reason they decide. They don't have to follow the specific outlines and apply them in a fair way.
Yeah, I mean, we saw recently we had a Twitter employee or a contractor who was leaving and deleted the President of the United States Twitter account, at least for a few moments. Apparently, this doesn't just apply to the President. A lot of conservatives could be subjected to this very type of censorship.
Right, and it brings to mind another story we did earlier this week regarding Google, and it seems that the tech giants are really going out of their way to make sure that conservative content isn't spreading on social media. So what we found out that Google was doing is they were adding fact-check reviews to conservative websites when you do a Google search. So when you search the Daily Caller, it comes up with a review of different fact checks that have been performed on us. Same thing doesn't happen for liberal websites. And those fact checks, a lot of them were actually incorrect or improperly applied to us. So when you Google the Daily Caller, a lot of people who don't know who we are would get the impression that we're out here spreading a bunch of fake news because there are all these Snopes and PolitiFact fact checks in the column of Google.
Right, and as you said, they don't have anything to do with the Daily Caller. Even the pieces that they link to in the fact check bar associated with the Daily Caller have nothing to do with our site.
One of them was a Washington Post fact check of a claim that Trump made, and somehow that got applied to our website when they were fact-checking the president. So I don't know how exactly that happened, but it's a clear, obvious bias from Google.
The Senate voted Thursday 65-34 to reauthorize the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, FISA, a piece of legislation that was recently set to expire without significant changes to the government's surveillance apparatus. The bill, which passed the House 256-164 last week, extends Section 702 of the FISA program for 6 years if it is ultimately signed by President Donald Trump. The specific statute allows federal intelligence agencies to collect data on foreigners suspected of crimes. The broad powers interpreted in the law and the inherent nature of surveillance, however, often cause the electronic communications of law-abiding Americans to be scooped up as well. The crux of the debate surrounding the legislation was if it needed fundamental reforms in order to safeguard constitutional protections for American citizens, something a bipartisan group of senators have been consistently advocating for. National security hawks, like Republican Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas, argue that FISA and all of its both enumerated and unlisted powers are necessary for the U.S. intelligence agencies to combat crime abroad, particularly terrorism. Contrarily, privacy champions like Republican Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky and Democratic Senator Ron Wyden of Oregon, argue that it is possible to both ensure the intelligence community, IC, is fully equipped to protect the country from evildoers abroad, while also protecting the foundational principles of the U.S. Constitution. Related, the battle over the government's massive surveillance powers has arrived. They believe the best way to achieve this balance is by restructuring the law with major reforms, such as changing the about collection practice in which communications sometimes entirely among innocent Americans can be swept up if they reference the intended target's email address. I rise in opposition to the government listening to your phone calls, reading your emails or reading your text messages without a warrant, Paul said on the Senate floor in an impassioned speech to colleagues Tuesday. It doesn't mean the government will never do this, but it means they will have to ask a judge. They would have to ask a judge if they have probable cause that you committed a crime. Not all of the speakers on the Senate floor Tuesday advocated for more reforms of FISA, and against a, for the most part, clean reauthorization. It's not a perfect bill, but I hardly have worked on a perfect piece of legislation, Democratic Senator Mark Warner of Virginia, who is also the vice chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, said while advocating for the bill. He asserted that it's comprehensive enough for the IC, while still making some ostensible concessions. Warner even turned around during his speech in an attempt to personally address Wyden and his deep-seated concerns. We've been debating this issue for the past 18 months, Warner continued. I believe this bill will strengthen and protect Americans. This is the most reviewed federal program in government, Republican Senator Richard Burr of North Carolina said following Warner's speech. Wyden requested 2 more minutes of speaking time on the floor towards the end of the debating session to clarify that a vote to turn down reauthorization would not stop the program from operating, nor imperil the IC's investigative processes. Eventually, after a lengthy cloture vote, the final vote was cast. The final vote on 6-year reauthorization then had a maximum of 30 hours for further debate. Originally, the bill was given a sunset for the end of 2018, and lawmakers either scrambled to reinstate the law's spying programs, or resisted and waited for deep concessions. It was eventually given a temporary reauthorization as the proverbial shot clock was winding down and Congress was ready to leave for its Christmas recess. But the time of kicking the can down the road ended, and it is now in the hands of Trump, who last week chimed into the debate with some contradictory statements. At Real Donald Trump. House votes on controversial FISA Act today. This is the act that may have been used, with the help of the discredited and phony dossier, to so badly surveil and abuse the Trump campaign by the previous administration and others. Donald J. Trump. Heavy checkmark. At Real Donald Trump. With that being said, I have personally directed the fix to the unmasking process since taking office, and today's vote is about foreign surveillance of foreign bad guys on foreign land. We need it. Get smart. 9:14 a.m., January 11, 2018. 15,521 15,521 replies 12,414 12,414 retweets 60,165 60,165 likes. Trump's original tweet reflects his apparent apprehensiveness over the surveillance powers, since he and many others believe that lame duck, perhaps rogue, intelligence officials within maybe the FBI or larger Department of Justice, purposefully unmasked key public officials within the Trump administration. Former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn's ties to Russian proxies, for example, were discovered through 702 surveillance mechanisms, after what some say was a deliberate act from Obama administration officials during the transitional period. In a piece titled "Will the GOP Remake Surveillance Laws After Trump Leaks?", the Daily Caller News Foundation explored how the Flynn outing may change the perception of certain legislators who almost always side with the wishes of the IC. Follow Eric on Twitter. Send tips to Eric at dailycalerNewsFoundation.org. These 2 loopholes in the new spying bill help the U.S. spy on Americans. The Senate joined the House in passing a 6-year renewal of Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, over the objections of civil libertarians who say the law makes it too easy to spy on Americans without a warrant, Politico reports. The law is mostly designed to allow warrantless surveillance of people overseas with no ties to the United States, using data the NSA vacuums up from telecom giants as well as major internet companies like Facebook, Google, and Apple. But it also allows other security agencies, including the FBI, to examine conversations and internet data from Americans that get swooped up in the course of such monitoring, a process sometimes called backdoor surveillance. At a 2015 hearing of the secret FISA court, One Justice Department lawyer described these backdoor searches as the FBI's Google of its lawfully acquired information. Under the law just passed, a new restriction would require that the FBI obtain a warrant before conducting searches related to an established criminal investigation. But the bill permits exceptions to that rule, including in cases involving national security and when the FBI determines there is a threat to life or serious bodily harm. And the bill still lets the FBI search surveillance data related to U.S. persons before it opens a criminal case. As passed, the law would also enable the National Security Agency to resume a practice sometimes called about collection, whereby the agency grabs communications that simply mention a particular target, rather than being sent to or from that person. The NSA had voluntarily abandoned the practice last year under scrutiny from the FISA court. The Trump administration supports the bill, which passed the Senate 65-34 with votes from both parties, despite objections from senators who argued the bill doesn't do enough to protect individual liberties. Rand Paul, the Republican from Kentucky, and Ron Wyden, the Oregon Democrat, both attempted to filibuster the bill on Tuesday, and had co-sponsored an alternative bill that had support from civil rights groups, but it never reached the Senate floor for debate. Should the government be allowed to search this database to prosecute you for not paying your taxes or for a minor marijuana violation? Absolutely not, Paul said on Tuesday, arguing that warrantless searches were unconstitutional. Rubber stamping this awful bill is a dereliction of duty by a Congress that has a responsibility to protect Americans' freedoms, as well as our country's security, said Wyden.
Does the government work for us or do we work for the government? Tonight, what if the Constitution no longer applied? What if the whole purpose of the Constitution was to limit the government? What if Congress's enumerated powers in the Constitution no longer limited Congress, but were actually used as a justification to extend Congress's authority over every realm of human life? What if the president, meant to be an equal to Congress, has instead become a democratically elected, term-limited monarch? What if the president assumed that everything he did was legal just because he's the president? What if he could interrupt your regularly scheduled radio and TV programming for a special message from him? What if he could declare war on his own? What if he could read your emails and your texts without a search warrant? What if he could kill you without warning? What if Supreme Court justices no longer looked to the Constitution to determine the constitutionality of a law, but rather simply to what justices who preceded them thought about it? What if the rights and principles guaranteed in the Constitution have been so distorted in the past 200 years as to be unrecognizable by the founders? What if the 50 states were no longer sovereign entities, equals to each other, and parents of the federal government they voluntarily constituted? What if the states were mere provinces of a totally nationalized and fully centralized government? What if the Constitution was amended stealthily, not by constitutional amendments duly ratified by the states, but by the constant and persistent expansion of the federal government's role in our lives? What if the federal government decided if its own powers were proper and constitutional? What if the Constitution were no longer the supreme law of the land? What if you needed a license from the government to speak, to assemble, or to protest against the government? What if the government didn't like what you planned to say, and so it didn't give you the license? What if the right to keep and bear arms only applied to the government? What if posse comitatus, the federal law that prohibits our military from occupying our streets, were no longer in effect? What if the government considered the military an adequate dispenser of domestic law enforcement? What if cops looked and acted like troops and you couldn't distinguish the military from the police? What if you were not secure in your person, in your papers, and in your property? What if federal agents could write their own search warrants in defiance of the Constitution? What if the government could decide when you were and were not entitled to a jury trial? What if the government could take your property whenever it wanted? What if the government could continue prosecuting you until it got the verdict it wanted? What if the government could force you to testify against yourself simply by labeling you a domestic terrorist? What if the government could torture you until you said what the government wanted to hear? What if people running for president actually supported torture? What if the government tortured your children to get to you? What if government judges and government lawyers intimidated juries into convicting the innocent? What if the government could send you to your death and your innocence meant nothing so long as the government's procedures were followed? What if America's prison population, the largest in the world, was a cruel and unusual way for a country to be free? What if half the prison population never harmed anyone but themselves? What if the people had no rights except those the government chose to let them have? What if the states had no rights except to do as the federal government commanded? What if our elected officials didn't really live among us, but instead all had their hearts and homes in Washington, D.C.? What if the government could strip you of your rights because of where your mother was when you were born? What if the income tax was unconstitutional? What if the states were convinced to give up their representation in Congress? What if the government tried to ban you from using a substance in your body that is older than the government itself? What if voting didn't mean anything anymore because both political parties stand for big government? What if the government could write any law, regulate any behavior, and tax any event? The Constitution be damned. What if the government was the reason we don't have a Constitution anymore? What if you could love your country but hate what the government has done to it? What if sometimes to love your country you had to alter or abolish the government? What if Jefferson was right? What if that government is best which governs least? What if I'm right? What if the government is wrong? What if it is dangerous to be right when the government is wrong? What if it is better to perish fighting for freedom than to live as a slave? What if freedom's greatest hour of danger is now?
County. This is Charlotte County COPWATCH, and I wanted to explain what fair use is. You can use pieces of news articles if you're doing it for news reporting, you have commentary, and you're doing it for education purposes. So that's what fair use is, as you can see right here. Another reason why I wanted to make this video is to let you know I have just joined with Patreon. A nice thing with Patreon, I make no money on YouTube. They took the money away years ago, and so this is another way to give, and it's a nice thing too because you can give monthly. You can give $1, $5, $10, whatever. I do 4 to 5 hours a day on trying to wake the sheep up on how corrupt it is and different ways that you can fight the corruption. So Patreon is a way that you can do it, and then of course the old way is still there. Donate to Charlotte County COPWATCH with PayPal or credit card. So keep that in mind. 4 to 5 hours a day. I make no money, but the corruption happened to me and I'm sick of it, so I'm trying to wake people up. But my wife would love it if some, if we could get some help out there. There's 47,000 subscribers. Just think if each one of you subscribers just gave a, let's say, actually, yes, $1 a month. 47,000 subscribers gave $1 a month. That would be awesome. That's not going to happen. But anyways, that would be great if it did happen. But, do the math in your head. Just think about it. Like I said, 4 to 5 hours a day. I get no money from YouTube. YouTube has gone nuts. You can't do anything anymore. They're taking the money away everywhere. So these are a couple different ways that you can still help out with all this time that I put in. And as you know, I'm in a special situation where, at least I can do it. 4 to 5 hours a day. We have a cleaning company during the day. That's what allows me to do this, and we're debt free. So this is my hobby. I don't go fishing and all that other crap. I try to save the world. So help me out to make the wife happy, man. In fact, if you guys did give $1 a day, and there was 47,000 of you, and you did it, and each of you gave $1, and that was every month, oh my God, yes, I could quit. I could start suing them. Another idea too that we have is, if I got, you know, some funds, we could actually contact everyone that has been ticketed and or arrested and put in jail and start sending them postcards to let them know we're here, and to see if everything went all right, and if it didn't, find out their story. So we could even do more investigations and more lawsuits. Lawsuits take money. So just think about that. You know, 47,000 of you so far right now. You know, $1 a day. I mean, $1 a month on Patreon, or $5 a month Patreon, 10, 20, whatever. Just do the math in your head, help out. This is a lot of work every single day. Thanks.